welcome in. This is the Steve Gill Show, and each Monday we get a national security update from Frank Gaffney, the president for the Center for Security Policy. You can find their website at centerforsecuritypolicy.org with our Let's Be Frank segment. Frank Gaffney is with us, as usual, on this Monday, along with a special guest, Imam Anjem Choudary. He is the founder of Sharia for America, Sharia, the number 4 America.com, has also been instrumental in pushing Sharia for the UK, United Kingdom, as well, with an organization similar to Sharia for America that was formed there. You've seen him recently on Fox. You may have heard him on Friday on Hannity. And Imam Anjem Choudary and Frank Gaffney together with us on the Steve Gill Show. Together, at least in terms of conversation, not together on the issues, guys. Thank you all for being with us, Imam and Frank. Good to have you with us.
Yes,
Imam Choudary, let me start off with you. You have said, maybe this is an area of agreement, that Islam is not a religion of peace. It is a religion of submission to Allah. At least we agree on that, because I don't see Islam as a religion of peace either. Is this description that we hear so much from those who are supporting of Islam, that it is a religion of peace and tolerance, is it any more tolerant than it is peaceful in your view?
Yes. Let me just begin by saying, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah. And, let me begin as well by saying that every human being wants what is best for them in this life and in the hereafter. We want all of us to prevent harm to ourselves and benefit. And we all want to attain, at least those people who believe in God, his paradise in the hereafter. And Islam, in fact, does not mean peace, as many people would have you believe, but rather it means istislam, which is submission. In other words, to submit to the commands of God in this life and to leave his prohibitions and to abide by everything that he says, and hoping, inshallah, in the hereafter, to attain his paradise.
But that submission is forced upon people by those, as we've looked at the history of Islam, at the point of a sword. It's not a matter of submit to God as you believe in your own view. It is, we're going to make you submit.
Mm-hmm. No, that's not actually true, because we do distinguish between the law and order and the individual. Allah said in the Quran, La ikraha fi din, he said there's no compulsion in the religion. And this is not abrogated, as I'm sure Frank would try to have you believe, but it is still there. That applies to the individual. There's no compulsion at all in religion as far as an individual is concerned, whether he should embrace Islam or not. But certainly we do believe that the oppression and the corruption is manifest on the sea and the land because of man-made law. So as far as the political system is concerned, the judiciary, the economics, the social system, etc., we believe that this should be in accordance with the divine law, and therefore if we can remove that, even forcibly, we can take people out of the shackles of man-made law into the beauty and justice of divine law, and we believe that is a mercy for mankind.
Frank, the bottom line is that the Imam has also said that man-made law, choice by man, is not what should be approached or embraced, that it is what God has said, and by gosh, they're going to make us embrace what they believe God has said, whether we like it or not.
Well, that certainly is a historical experience, Steve. And while Imam Choudary, and I'm not sure, Imam, maybe you could clarify this. Are you an Imam, in fact?
Well, in fact, the Imam is somebody who leads the prayer, and plus, obviously, someone who is a leader among the community. I certainly have many organizations and bodies which I run. So, I mean, if you want to call me Sheikh or Imam or brother, I'm quite happy just to be called Anjem, quite honestly.
I'll tell you what, since I call Frank, I'll call you Anjem. Frank, go ahead.
I'm happy with that.
Go ahead, Frank.
Look, the issue here is very simple, I think, and that is, if you believe that the United States of America is a democratic republic based upon a constitution that enshrines and guarantees unalienable rights, including to have laws made by people and people who represent us and who are accountable to us, the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, to choose to practice whatever religion you wish, whether it's Islam or anything else, and to engage in that practice freely, publicly, as you see fit. Freedom of dissent and protection against cruel and unusual punishment. Well, none of that is possible under Sharia. In fact, all of that is explicitly precluded by Sharia. And the interesting thing about Anjem is that he does speak rather forthrightly about some aspects of his program. And for that I commend him. It's refreshing, because what we get from a lot of his colleagues, some of whom are associated with the kind of program that he is, some of whom are engaged with the Muslim Brotherhood and with jihad, but the purpose is the same, to impose this Sharia program on all of us. But he does get into some issues like this question about whether there is compulsion of religion, where I believe he is, like the Muslim Brothers and others, engaging in taqiyya. There's no question that the ultimate requirement of the Quran that abrogates all others is the requirement for jihad, to make the infidels, the kuffars, as he likes to say, feel subdued. And that is, unfortunately, what we're up against with people who, like him, seek to impose this anti-constitutional program on the rest of us.
Anjem, how is it possible for a non-Muslim, whether it's Jewish or Christian or Buddhist or anything else, to believe what a Muslim tells them when under the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sharia, under the tradition of Islam, you're allowed to lie to us? In fact, you're encouraged to lie to us because, we're like dogs. It's like lying to your dog and saying, look, I've got a treat if you'll come through the door. How can we believe anything you say when you are authorized to lie to us?
Actually, no, that's not true, actually. First of all, I don't believe in taqiyya. Taqiyya is a Shia concept. I'm Sunni, and I believe to follow the companions of the Prophet. And the Prophet said the Muslim, he never lies. And lies are only a permit in certain, strange circumstances. In one narration, the Prophet said, in war, if you want to reconcile between people, if you want to do, and if you want as well, for example, to under duress, for example, there are certain circumstances in which, it's not considered to be a lie. But ultimately, in normal conversation, I'm never going to lie because that's not allowed for me. And what I would say as well is that Frank is not quite accurate in this. I don't know how much knowledge of Islam he has, but it seems to be quite poor. Because when the Sharia was in fact implemented, the Jews and Christians did live side by side with the Muslims. We have an example in the heart of Europe where the Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived side by side for over 800 years. The basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter were provided. Even their life, honor, dignity was protected, and the churches and synagogues are still there for over a millennium. And in fact, when the Inquisition took place at the hands of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, the Christians went to the Islamic State for sanctuary. So, it was never the policy of the Muslims to kill them. We certainly do believe in imposing the law and order of the Sharia. As I said, I believe that's a mercy for mankind. And if the people are being oppressed, then they need to be taken out of that oppression. We see, for example, in Libya today and in Egypt and other places, there are brutal dictatorships. But that dictatorship is based upon oppression. If you have the Sharia implemented, all of this oppression will be removed. If we look in the history of the relationship in many countries, even in India, for example, even in the Middle East, you see that when the Sharia was in fact implemented, people flourished, and their own religion and ideology was not something which was, attacked. People were not attacked.
And yet there are no places where Islam is in majority control, whether it's Saudi Arabia or really anywhere in the Middle East, in Indonesia, where Christian churches are allowed to grow and expand and to build. I mean, there's no tolerance for anything else. That seems to be a misnomer in Islam as well. Today we're going to take a quick break. Anjem Choudary is with us, Frank Gaffney with us. When we come back, we'll also ask Anjem Choudary about his comments supporting terrorism. He's praised the 9/11 terrorists, saying they are marvelous martyrs. Doesn't Islam condemn terrorism, at least by word, if not by deed? We'll talk about that with Frank Gaffney. Anjem Choudary when we continue with more of the Steve Gill Show.
Let's be frank with national security expert Frank Gaffney.
Hey, welcome back in. This is the Steve Gill Show with Frank Gaffney, our national security expert. To go to centerforsecuritypolicy.org to find his website. Also joined today by Anjem Choudary. You can find his website at Sharia4, that's the number 4, Sharia4America.com. And Anjem and Frank, thanks again for being on with us today and for having a good discussion. Anjem, you've been called a sick, evil SOB by Sean Hannity. Slate Magazine's called you a buffoon. I'm sure there's a Quranic or Arabic term for sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me. By the same token, you have become very high profile in terms of what's termed radical Islam in the world. Some say it's because you're a provocateur, you're you're somebody who likes the media spotlight. I mean, you've got a plan up to tear down the Statue of Liberty, and in the meantime, before you tear it down and put up a minaret, you want to put a burqa on the Statue of Liberty. Are you serious about this, or are you just trying to draw attention to your cause?
Well, first of all, let me say that I think Sean Hannity's comments say more about him than they do about me. And as far as the publicity, if I can gain publicity for the call of Islam, then I'm very happy for that. I don't have a problem with that. I believe that all of the messengers of God, whom, who are examples for us, were out open in the public arena. Jesus and Moses and Abraham and all of them, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon all of them, and the final messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they want the people to be confined to their homes. So, if we can gain publicity for the call, I think that's very good. And other people will come and they will verify. As for the Statue of Liberty, idolatry and statues are completely prohibited in Islam. It was just an idea to say, in the meantime, they could be covered while we think about ways in which, to change it and to do something useful with it. So this was the idea. But it's just an idea at the end of the day. It's not like casting a stone. I do believe that we need to have a healthy, open discussion and debate as to the way forward for mankind. I believe it's Islam. Obviously, you believe in democracy and freedom.
When you look at the debate and the way it's been going on, I don't think the name calling is helpful in that. And yet you've acknowledged in other interviews that sometimes you say things that are a little bit. I mean, again, look, people in the public eye do that. I mean, you're not going all Charlie Sheen, which is a good thing. But you've said that even when you termed the terrorists on 9/11 as magnificent martyrs, you've said, look, that was to draw a little bit more attention to what you were saying. Do you see them as people to herald those who killed 3,000, those who kill innocent men, women, and children in the name of Islam all over the world? Do you see them as heroes, or do you see them as heels?
Well, let me say that 9/11 obviously was a very significant event in the history of the relationship between Islam and non-Islam, and in between, indeed, the East and the West. And I don't think that we can avoid discussing it. And therefore, it's very important that we do discuss and we debate it. And one of the reasons why we used, for example, the Magnificent 19 as an advertising ploy was to draw the media to an event and to conferences on the anniversary of this particular event, and to say to them, look, we don't need to continue in this quagmire of violence. We can deal with the root causes of why 9/11 took place. It wasn't about glorifying those people who took that particular action. Rather, as Muslims, we only have two things we celebrate in our calendar. One is Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr, one at the end of Ramadan and the other at the end of the Hajj season. We don't celebrate the life and the death of anybody. But certainly we need to draw attention to the real causes behind which things like 9/11 took place, to say to the people that 9/11, was not the beginning of history. And unless we deal with those causes, some of which I'm sure like the occupation of Muslim land, the support of Israel, etc., then these things will continue. I think all of us would like to live in a world where we don't have 7/7s and 9/11s and 3/11s, and where land is not occupied, where we can have a decent, relationship. We can discuss and dialogue as to the way forward for mankind. That's what I'm calling for. But, sometimes it's necessary to wake people up and to draw their attention, and I will use advertising ploys.
Frank, is it provocateur? Is it, just kind of giving the wrong message? I mean, when you kind of hold up those who murdered 3,000 in any kind of positive way, that would seem to inspire others to do more of the same.
Well, indeed it is. And this is because Sharia, the program that Anjem Choudary aspires to have imposed on all of us, and I think he used a useful formulation just a moment ago when he said it's Islam versus freedom. That is exactly right. He believes Sharia should dictate how we behave. We believe freedom and our civil liberties and our Constitution should dictate what we do and how we live our lives. But, Steve, as we've talked about most weeks, you have in Anjem Choudary a man who is committed, I'm sure, to promoting his cause, and who sees the value of having the violent kind of jihad as an element to bringing about that submission, but who also, I'm quite sure, sees the value of the opportunities that he has in Britain and others have elsewhere in free societies, notably the Muslim Brotherhood, to wage jihad by stealth, to seek through various techniques, including Sharia-compliant finance, including a host of concessions that are extracted from the political authorities to accommodate special arrangements for Muslims, including insinuating into the courts of the countries in question, some 87 Islamic or Sharia law courts are now operating in Britain. This is a counterpart to the violent jihad. And what I think he is saying when he extols the 9/11 guys is he appreciates that the more people feel terrified, the easier it will be to bring them to submission, whether it's through these stealthy techniques or ultimately by making them feel subdued, which, as I said, is the ultimate word on jihad in the Quran, and what I think we all have to be clear about. You know, he can talk about Andalus, the golden age of Islam in Spain, as we're often told it was. It wasn't so golden for the people who were enslaved by the Muslims. Were there churches there? Yes, there were, and quite a number of them, including the one in Cordoba, were converted into mosques, a triumphalist symbol. And interestingly enough, Steve, as we've talked about, the fact that Cordoba House was the name given to the mosque that is supposed to be built on Ground Zero close by it is exemplary of this same tradition. It's all about submission. There's no freedom involved, and that, I believe, is totally antithetical to everything we hold dear, and why when Anjem Choudary comes on these programs, I think it's very useful to enable the American people to see the choice that they have now before they no longer have a choice.
Anjem, that's a good point in that it is not a submission by an individual to the will of God of, I willingly accept, Allah and his dictates under Islam. It is people imposing that choice that seems to be what Islam is about in the world today. It is not, I'm going to allow you to choose what you want. It's, I'm going to allow you to choose Islam. If you don't choose it, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to enslave you. I'm going to make you a second-class citizen. That's not choice the way most Americans would understand it.
Well, let me say that, first of all, we need to distinguish between free will and free choice. You have free will as to whether you want to embrace Islam or not. Nobody's going to force you to become Muslim.
But yet people are forcing people to become under the threat of death or murder.
I'm coming on to that point as well.
I'll tell you what, we're going to be up against the clock. I'll tell you what.
Okay.
Let's hang on, because I want to get into that, because I think that, to me, seems to be the crux of the issue. Is it submission to God's will or submission to man's will imposing God's will? And I suspect, Anjem, you would be violently opposed if a Christian theocracy was being imposed upon you by Christians saying the Bible says you've got to accept Jesus, and accept Jesus or we're going to kill you. We'll talk about this idea of submission. Is it submission to God's will or submission to man's interpretation of God's will when we get to the issue of Islam versus the world? We'll talk more about it in a moment. Anjem Choudary with us. Frank Gaffney, they're going to hang on for another segment because this is too important to give short shrift to. Welcome back in. This is the Steve Gill Show, a special extension of our weekly segment with Frank Gaffney. Let's be frank. Frank Gaffney, of course, the president for the Center for Security Policy. You can find his website at centerforsecuritypolicy.org. Also joined today in our discussion about Islam, about Sharia law with Anjem Choudary. He is a Muslim in Britain, a former solicitor, a former lawyer. Maybe that's why Sean Hannity calls you all those mean names, Anjem. He just doesn't like lawyers, and you and I at least shared that in common. Of course, that's something that everybody can agree on. Everybody's got problems with lawyers. Anyway, Anjem Choudary with us. His organization, Sharia 4, the number 4, America.com. He has been called a radical Muslim, a radical Islamist provocateur, and we were talking just before the break about this issue of choice, of Islam is submission. The question is it submission to God's will, or is it submission to man imposing God's will upon others? And Anjem, I kind of raised the issue of, I'm sure you would be opposed if a theocracy was being imposed in Saudi Arabia, for example, where Christian churches were being built, where Muslim mosques were being torn down, and a Christian theocracy was being imposed. That's what people see when they see Islam being imposed on Christian societies. Is it a matter of will, or is it a matter of submission?
Yes, hello. Yeah, as I was saying before, I think we need to make a distinction between free will and free choice. Certainly, there is no compulsion for someone to embrace Islam, but once you become Muslim, you are obliged to abide by the Sharia, and that involves not only on a personal level, but also to implement it within society, because obviously if you believe something is good, then you want to share it with others and you want the society to abide by what is best. But can I just say, Muslims are against slavery. The fact that there was slavery already in existence in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is something which must have been addressed, obviously, and Islam is a complete way of life, has a solution for everything. Therefore, Islam also tells you how to emancipate slaves. But in fact, the biggest protagonists of slavery, if you look in your own history, were indeed the Christians, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, the British, etc. And history will testify to that. And can I just say as well...
And yet, but you've still got Muslims enslaving people in the world today, in the Sudan.
No,
in fact, Saudi Arabia didn't even do away with slavery till the 1960s.
Well, if they are doing that, then they're not abiding by the Sharia. And can I just say that Saudi Arabia and the Iranian regime are some of the most tyrannical, barbaric regimes not implementing the Sharia. They're implementing a monarchy system, and monarchyism is against the Sharia. And can I just say one other thing, that when you talk about freedom, and liberalism, we all believe that there are parameters for acceptable behavior. The question here is not that, whether, we believe that there is certain spectrum of acceptable behavior. The question that I am posing is that should sovereignty belong to God or to man? You believe that the parameters of freedom and democracy should be laid down by Barack Obama and the Senate. I believe they should be according to divine law. That is the debate, and therefore we need to look at the inimitability of the Quran and the divine text. And finally, can I say, if Islam was such a horrible religion and forcing people, how is it that it's the fastest growing ideology in the West, especially among young Western women? If you want to look at Islam, you don't need to take it from Anjem Choudary. You can look at the Quran, you can look at the life of the Prophet, make your own mind up. That's what I say to the American people. Don't take it from me. Look at the sources.
But it's interesting, though, that you've got Western women embracing Islam. They're not exactly going to places like Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia and actually living under, if your interpretation is right, that it's not actually Sharia, they're not exactly flocking to living under those circumstances. Frank, why are these Western women embracing kind of Islam light? If they want to get real Islam, go to Afghanistan, live under the Taliban if you really love this stuff.
There's no way of saying what this group as a class is motivated by, Steve. I think it's probably a lot of individual explanations, personal needs, sense of love, perhaps, for a Muslim man. Who knows? But our point is let's not get diverted. Do we want the program that the Saudis, the Iranians, the Taliban, the government in Sudan, whatever passes for governments in Somalia, in Pakistan and the like, are applying? They believe it is Sharia. They believe that they are following the program that Sharia lays out. Anjem Choudary has on various previous occasions espoused some of the very barbaric practices that they implement, from stoning people to death for things like adultery, the murder of Jews, or the murder of gays, or the murder of apostates. These are part and parcel of the program that he would have imposed upon us. And I simply think that most Americans are going to be listening to this conversation with incredulity. They're going to be saying to themselves, he's got to be kidding, and he's not kidding. The thing about it is he's rather forthright about it. He does engage in taqiyya. And by the way, just to go back to that point, there is in an authoritative text on the subject entitled Al-Taqiyya fi al-Islam the following description. They say taqiyya is of fundamental importance to Islam. Practically every Islamic sect agrees to it and practices. We can go so far as to say the practice of taqiyya, again, lying for the faith, is mainstream in Islam, and that those few sects not practicing it deviate from the mainstream. So here's the point, Steve. I think Anjem Choudary is by and large more candid, more direct than many of those, particularly in the West, particularly in this country, associated with the Muslim Brotherhood, when he describes what he wants to have imposed upon us. Namely, a law given, he thinks, by God that is absolutely antithetical to freedom, antithetical to our Constitution. But there are these things where he would have you believe it won't be so bad, or it'll really turn out okay if you just submit to it. And I think, again, most of us don't want any part of it. And if we don't, We have to stop it from being insinuated into our country either by stealth alone by violence.
You know, Anjem, one of the things that I read a lot, you know, you're described as a radical Muslim, as radical in this way, and you talked about the distinction earlier in Sunni and Shia perspective. Do you see yourself as radical? I mean, when you're espousing your view of Islam, is it mainstream? I mean, these people that say, oh, I'm a moderate Muslim, I'm not for all this other stuff. I mean, clearly you think Islam means doing things in a very particular way. Is that radical or not?
Well, I think that a lot of these terms are pejorative and they are used to demonize and vilify and indeed isolate certain sections of the community whom the government obviously wants in some way or another to silence. So I don't believe that there is this distinction. I believe that the Quran and the Sunnah, the sayings and actions and consent of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is something which should be the criteria for judging whether someone is abiding by Islam or not. So I believe there are practicing Muslims and there are non-practicing Muslims.
Just as there are Baptists that follow the ideology of the Baptist Church, and there are others that say, oh, you know, I'm kind of a Baptist light. I guess that's my question. Yeah. You would see, you know, your views as mainstream Islam, and that these folks that are not following, you know, prescriptions of Sharia, imposing Sharia on, because as you said, when you become a Muslim, you also embrace the obligation to impose that Sharia, to impose God's will, because that's what God wants. That seems to be, quote, mainstream, right?
Well, I do believe that is what the Sharia tells us. But can I add as well on what Frank said, that, you know, we don't believe in killing Jews. I think there's an obfuscation here about what is taking place in Israel and the liberation of that land from occupation, and Jews in general. Nobody has a problem of living together with Jews and Christians, you know, under divine law. And can I just say as well that, you know, many of the things which I'm accused of saying that Islam will deal with, I do believe, in fact, Christians and Jews and all of the divine books, they say the same thing. I mean, you can find in Leviticus, for example, that homosexuality is completely condemned. We condemn it. We condemn theft and rape. We condemn as well pedophilia. The only question is that there are specific laws in Islam, because Islam came as a complete package. It didn't just say that we need to do this and that without to have a complete system which is workable. You know, we saw what happened when Christianity was implemented in the Dark Ages, and called Dark Ages for a very good reason. Whereas when Islam was implemented, then we can see that there was, in fact, mercy and justice for mankind.
But you're not seeing any mercy and justice when the Taliban was lopping off heads in Afghanistan. I mean, it's a difference to say in the Bible, you know, we condemn homosexuality. It's another to kill gays. It's another to say, you know, I mean, why are we having all these Muslims, if it is peace and tolerance, you know, killing people in the name of Allah, shouting Allah Akbar when they gun down innocent civilians?
Well, can I just say, look, on the concept of homosexuality, and we'll come on to the Taliban in a moment, you know, if a man loves another man or is inclined towards him, Islam does not punish people for that. And even if they're holding hands or they're hugging in public, there's no problem with that. And what they're doing in their own homes, nobody's going to be spying or monitoring them in their own home. However, if people have a relationship, a kind of pen on the ink type of relationship, and I'm being careful with my words because I don't know who's listening to this, but if having that pen on the ink type of relationship and there are sufficient witnesses in the public arena, I mean, even if that's your own wife, you would be punished for that. The question is, what should that punishment be, and who should lay down that punishment? But, you know, we believe that is something which is sanctioned by God.
But in Islamic countries, Anjem, if a man and a woman are holding hands in public, you get them getting lashed by the Islamic police.
It's not really. Well, I mean, if you're doing that, then that's not really appropriate. And as I said, there's no country in the world today which implements the Sharia. We have 55 countries, all of them dictators. The last time, in fact, that we had Sharia implemented as an order was before the 3rd of March 1934, which is why on the 87th anniversary, I was supposed to have the protest outside of the White House calling people towards the Sharia. But, you know, my question really to Frank and you and to all your listeners...
This is a fair dose of tequila you're getting now.
I tell you what, have you guys got one more segment? Have you got time for one more segment, or we got to go?
Sure.
Yeah. Well,
hang on, because I got that shut up music in my ears on Jim, so we got to shut up for a minute. If we're going to do anything that we're going to declare, we can agree, you know, too many commercials. I'm not sure if that's Sharia or Christianity, but we ought to do something about that. We're going to take a commercial break. When we come back, Anjem Choudary and Frank Gaffney continue with us. Is Islam really tolerant towards gays and people holding hands? We're back in a moment. This is the Steve Gill Show. Hey, welcome back in. This is the Steve Gill Show. Conversation today with Anjem Choudary, the head of ShariahForAmerica.com. As he was mentioning, they were supposed to be having a rally, a protest rally at the White House last week. That got canceled. We're also talking with Frank Gaffney, president of the Center for Security Policy at centerforsecuritypolicy.org, as we're talking about Islam, Sharia, and world history and everything else, getting into a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. Frank, we were just talking, and Anjem was telling us that Sharia is not actually in place in these Muslim countries. I guess it's, from our perspective, it looks pretty close in places like Saudi Arabia. Is there a place where the Sharia is sort of being practiced?
Well, I think throughout the Muslim world, it's being practiced to varying degrees. I believe that those who are responsible for the holy sites of Islam are, while under a monarchy, to be sure, nonetheless regarded by the faithful as those who are most closely practicing Sharia, and doing so in a way that, to be clear, allows slavery, that does espouse the killing of Jews, that does involve the killing of gays, that does involve the killing of apostates, and that treats women as property and animals, that they're not allowed to drive, they're not allowed to be outside the home without male relatives, they have half the rights of men to property and so on. 4 male witnesses are required in case of alleged rape. I mean, these are the sorts of things, again, that nobody in America, I believe, who loves our Constitution, who loves the freedoms that we enjoy, who appreciates that we have a special kind of experience in this country under freedom, would want to live under for a moment. And that's the question that I think Anjem Choudary is really putting before us. He suggests that that in the interest of achieving, this happy state under Allah, that we will all freely go there. We're not going to freely go there, not for a minute. The question is, are we going to be forced to do it, or are we, through more stealthy techniques, going to be witnessing the diminution of our freedoms, the increasing presence and operation of Sharia in this country, albeit piecemeal at first, but what we see, for example, now in his adopted country of Britain, is the trajectory that this whole program takes on. Yes, the taqiyya is used to mask it. Yes, political correctness contributes to its success. But at the end of the day, what we see, if these folks have their way, is the mutation of free societies beyond recognition, and ultimately their destruction from within, which is, by the way, the express purpose of the Muslim Brotherhood in our own country. And I think that this kind of conversation, if we can strip out the taqiyya and just focus on the things that Anjem Choudary, I think, actually does attest to rather directly, we're going to have a clarity about the danger that Sharia represents to our country, to our way of life, to the things we hold dear, and we will, as a people, say, no thanks. We want to keep America Sharia-free. I certainly pray so.
Anjem, certainly in a lot of these Muslim majority countries, they are killing people who convert, or want to kill people who convert from Islam back to another religion. If you commit a religious offense, they're going to beat you, they're going to kill you if you're gay. I mean, clearly that's happening in these Muslim countries. You're saying that does not reflect what Sharia or the Quran calls for?
Absolutely. I do believe that there's a lot of oppression in the Muslim world, and no country at the moment is implementing the Sharia. In fact, by just implementing parts of the penal code without implement the social and economic justice which Islam imposes, and to educate the people, you're only really engendering hatred towards those aspects, because people don't see it as a whole package. As Frank said...
No, but Anjem, could I just ask you, could you clarify on that point, please? You do acknowledge that the penal code that is being implemented is part of Sharia, don't you? Isn't that what you just said?
You see, Frank, nobody's denying that we have the penal code. But what I would say to you is that, like you said earlier, we need to strip away the taqiyya, and I'm not using taqiyya, and we need to strip away the rhetoric. If I said to you, and I said to the American people, I want a system where there is basic food, clothing, and shelter free of charge for every citizen, where the life, the honor, the dignity, the wealth, the mind is protected, where things like alcohol, drugs, pornography, homosexuality, exploitation of the male and the female gender is something which is outlawed, where invisible wealth, which is the cause of the boom and bust, incidentally, and the recession, things like stocks, shares, pensions, insurance, are replaced with real tangible wealth and the efforts of people which you can measure, then that will resolve many of the things. And we would have, like, for example, the gold standard, which would deal with things like inflation and the devaluation, which is currently going to hit the American dollar. They will resolve many of the economic
sounds like communism with a god.
Yeah, where do you get this?
Utopian.
Wait a minute. Now, where do you get the free food, clothing, and housing? To be able to give, it doesn't just get created out of nothing. There has to be a foundation of an economic system that provides the wealth to give people this stuff.
Of course it does. But the thing is, the difference between the way that Islam looks at the economy, and incidentally, it was implemented for over 1,300 years, and it eradicated poverty as well when it was implemented, is that we do not see the economic problem as a lack of the resources or means of production. We see it as a problem of distribution. And the difference in
distribution is an issue because there's huge wealth in the Middle East, and there's huge poverty that is intractable.
They're not implementing the Sharia. You see, these people are dictators, and they are exploiting the people. But can I just make one point?
We've got about 10 seconds. We're going to finish up.
Yeah, the difference in Islam and communism is that we don't believe to share the wealth. We believe everyone has the basic needs, but you can work for the luxuries. We don't have the poverty trap that you face, for example, in America, with 30 or 40% of the people not being able to get a job and not being worthwhile if they do get a job.
Guys, we will do this again. Anjem Choudary, thank you for being with us. Frank Gaffney, thank you for being with us. We appreciate the conversation, and we'll do this again. Hey, we'll be back in a moment with more of the Steve Gill Show.